Welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. This is a show that helps pastors think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs. Well, hello there, and welcome to the EntrePastors podcast on YouTube. I'm Jon Sanders. I'm one of the co-founders of EntrePastors, and I'm so grateful to have you joining us on this week's episode. This is episode number 203, and the title of this week's episode is Empowering Women in the Marketplace with our guest, Elaine Lankford. Now, Elaine has an incredible story of transitioning out of a long-time career as a nurse and more into an entrepreneurial space these last few years. She's specifically serving women, coming alongside of them and helping them launch their own entrepreneurial businesses and nonprofits. And the thing I love about Elaine's story, at least one of the things I love about her story, is how she is proving once again that business is ministry. She is finding so many ways of doing ministry, not just here in the marketplace in the United States, but abroad. She has an incredible story of taking her organization international to Africa. I'll let her tell the details of that. I don't want to steal her thunder. But guys, we've got a great conversation coming your way with our friend Elaine Lankford. So without any further ado, check out the interview. Let's do this. Well, Elaine, it is our pleasure to welcome you to the EntrePastors podcast. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. You and I and Les, we are all connected through our mutual friend, Justin Janowski. I think we're all in a group that he has for people who are coaching and learning how to sell their coaching services better. Justin's an expert in that and is a good friend of EntrePastors and our show. So why don't we start here, Elaine, by asking you just to give an overview. If you're in that space, I already know some things about you if you're in Justin's world, but tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in the world, and we'll dive in from there.
All right. So I am the founder of She Steps Forward Coaching, where we are empowering 0 to 3 year Christian female entrepreneurs who are ready to step into the marketplace, supporting them in developing and scaling their businesses, ministries, and nonprofits. But I'm also the founder of She Steps Forward International, which is a nonprofit arm that I do. And we are also equipping, but we have a door that's open here, not only in the United States, but also in Nairobi, Kenya. And so we are working in both countries in that space and pushing more females into the marketplace and supporting them as they wrap their faith around what they feel like is their God-given calling.
All right. So there's so many directions I want to go with this, and I'm just going to label them right now so that I don't forget and it's recorded. I want to talk about the fact that you work with entrepreneurs, specifically female entrepreneurs. I have some questions around that for you. You have both a for-profit coaching and a nonprofit, so I kind of want to get into those worlds a little bit and how those are different. And then I would love to hear a little bit about the Africa story and how that came to be. So we'll dive into that a little bit. So let's start with this. Here's a good crossover for our community. Oh, by the way, I also want to talk about the business side of how you are, because I'm sure you would see what you're doing as ministry, and yet there's a business element to it. So there's a lot of things that just really blend well with our community and with our audience. So let's start talking about entrepreneurialism. We at EntrePastors help pastors primarily and people with a kingdom mindset launch businesses out in the marketplace. Not all of our community is pastors, but you are helping people, specifically women, launch businesses. So tell me a little bit about that work. How did you come to really develop a heart for entrepreneurialism, and then why specifically women? What is it about women that you are like, man, I want to help them specifically get into the marketplace as entrepreneurs?
Sure. So the first thing to know about me is that I've had a long-standing nursing career. So that's where my world started. However, in 2008, born and raised in the church, brought along those lines. But in 2008, I had a real crossover Job moment where some things shifted around and that I couldn't do anything about. And my nursing career went to the side. Also within that period of time, just in a few short months, my father passed away, who was just kind of a staple of our family. And not long after that, within about 6 to 8 months, my husband at 47 was diagnosed with prostate cancer. So you can imagine the stun of what was going on there, having been brought up in the church, having felt led into nursing, having this nice bubble wrapped life that was going on, no major issues. And then all of a sudden, smack in 2008, I had the trial of all trials.
Mm.
And through that process, God just really kind of grew some things in me, kind of highlighted some things that were going on with me, and just pushed me closer to coming back to the center of my faith. It wasn't that I wasn't faithful or not in church, but I was definitely drifting a little more toward my career, and I felt the pull back. And so in that process, he brought women to my mind. And when I started going down to Nicaragua on a missions trip with the current church that I was at, I started working with the women and the young ladies down there, and just really felt him say in the quiet of that country of where we were that I need you to help bring my daughters out. Had no clue what that meant. Came back home and then sat several Sundays in church meditating on that, and then just kind of looked out in the congregation and realized there was this sea of women who were not living out their full potential, their full purpose, and just thought it was just a wasted energy that could be tapped into if they knew what their purpose was, that people were cheering them on, and if they had a little bit of direction. And that's kind of how it started for me. To get into the entrepreneurial piece, because of what had kind of shifted around in my life, I self-published a book. I thought it was going to be the next Beth Moore. Was really excited to get the book kind of launched out, do some speaking. And of course, that sets you on an entrepreneurial track. You start having to market your book. You have to start doing the speaking engagements. And in that, I was encouraged that if I could do it, I could help other women do it. And so that was kind of the emphasis, I will say, of my start and how I
Okay.
got started.
So here's a question for you. Was that a difficult transition in terms of mindset for you to move from a place for years you're in a caretaking role, which you could again take nursing, and there's probably some similarities to the pastoring world just in terms of the care that you're giving to people. It's an employee, W-2 type relationship most likely, and now here you are transitioning into a place of an entrepreneur where you're actually charging people for help in a way that's different. Before, you didn't have to deal with that end of things. You just do your job, you get a paycheck. You don't actually have to have that conversation with the patient about, this is what it's going to cost for my services. But now as an entrepreneur, you have to have that conversation because no one else is selling your thing for you. So was that a pretty easy shift for you, or did you have some hangups along the way that you had to work through?
John, there's
Oh,
also a strong sense of calling that goes
Sure,
along with that as well for
for
health
sure.
caregivers. And so there's that same tension that we and a lot of other people face in our tribe.
Yeah, great point.
yeah. So I would say it was absolutely new territory for me. I was definitely used to being the servant and not necessarily being the one who had something return to me for what I was doing. And so making that transition was eye-opening for me. But as most things, you come to realize that if you want to do big things, that it does take funding. And so in the beginning, though, I did a lot of informal mentoring and coaching. I'd come up through the church. My husband and I were small group leaders. There was certainly women in the church that I leaned into and tried to help them with some of their issues. And when I got the bug that I really wanted to push it further, that's when I knew that I had to develop something that would allow for it to pay for itself. And
Mhm.
so, coming out of that nature, coming out of a church environment, coming out of an environment where women have looked up to you and received so much from you, to all of a sudden, what do you mean I need to pay for something?
Yeah.
It was a shift. It was a shift. And just being recognized that I was becoming an expert in an area and it was outside of the norm of the relationship we were going to have in a church environment was something I had to shift people into. For me, I was fortunate that God laid on my heart after doing some informal things for a while to develop a conference. And so conference became an easier transition. Oh, you're having a conference. Well, most people are used to buying tickets to conferences. But I will say the little bit that I had to learn in even doing that was at first we did it within the church building, not for the church, but within the church building. And then having to get people to separate out that Elaine is now doing something different from outside of the four walls of the church. Yes, we're physically in this building, but it's not a part of what's going on in the building. And getting their minds to transition that I was actually growing and doing something different that was going to go beyond those four walls. That was definitely a transition, and getting them to evaluate and feel like the quality of what we were giving them was worth something for them to exchange their money for.
Elaine, we could go back and just replay the last like 3 minutes of audio, and you just described in beautiful terms what so many pastors are struggling with who are trying to launch businesses, especially if those businesses are in the realm of like a coaching or counseling type of a thing. Maybe if it's a little easier to distinguish if they're out in, kind of a service-based thing, but even then there's still hangups that come along with that, and both from within their own thought process and in between their own two ears, as well as the expectations of others in their church. So let me just maybe ask this question then. What advice would you give based on your experience of walking that? And you're hopefully a little bit further down that road from some of our listeners who are thinking about it right now and thinking about jumping in. What's a piece of advice or two that you would give to a pastor or a church staff member or a ministry-minded person who's been so accustomed to just giving in the name of ministry, and now they still are going to serve people, but they're actually going to get paid for it so that they can stay in business and put food on the table? What advice would you give them to encourage them, or what's a landmine they can avoid stepping on that maybe you had to work through?
I think the first thing we have to do as Christians is realize that, yes, the local church is God's place that we come to and we all want to serve, but it does run as a business underneath. And we have to acknowledge that. Like, the church would not run without funding.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything we want to step into is going to require funding. Now, the trick is to start laying nice, firm, clear boundaries from the get-go. I wish I had more firm boundaries in the beginning. When we first started that conference piece, like, I had people were like, oh, I really want to come, I'm just not sure I can afford it. And then I would feel sorry and give a ticket away. And at the end of the day, that's not going to pay the bills of what we were doing at conference. And so I had to really like transition in that first time or two and say, this is really what it costs, and there's a reason I'm having to charge for it. And just really set up that what we were giving was valuable. But to make the next thing I learned in the next stage of doing that conference was to definitely move it outside of those four walls and make sure that people could clearly distinguish that this was not within the church boundary, that this was something I was doing outside of what I was doing to serve the church. And as soon as we separated our conference away from the church building and, for instance, started having it in a local hotel ballroom, people got it. This is not part of the church. This is not something she's doing for free. This is not something that we should expect. And so that's the real thing. You have to set up a clear boundary of where your church work stops and where your outside church work starts. And people need to have those boundaries and understand where they fall.
Yeah.
I appreciate you talking about those boundaries, Elaine, because most of the time, I think with most people, don't you think they're not being, when they have those expectations, they're not being mean, and they're not even being selfish. It's just what they know. It's just that world. We've done that sort of. I mean, we've at least been a part of it in establishing those expectations with great intentions and outcomes. So that's okay. But to do one doesn't mean you can't do the other. And, Jon, we've seen this also. It's a version of what we did when we kicked off EntrePastors, but we didn't quite, since we weren't inside the local church setting, we didn't really have that. But I'll tell you who did, and that's our friend, Giovanna Ellison. And I think those boundaries are very, very wise. And so she did something similar. She was running up against that same thing. And there was another layer for her, being the first lady, being the pastor's wife. So that's what she did, though. She started with that ladies conference, and then that was that gave her an opportunity to separate those things, and also it was a platform for her to go ahead and announce her one-on-one coaching opportunities, and she was able to grow from there. So that's a beautiful idea.
Yeah, well said. Well said. So, Elaine, what then is you're getting, and I want to dig into the story of the conference because I know that also is connected to the Africa story as well. But as far as the entrepreneurial piece, helping female entrepreneurs, what problem are you solving, or is entrepreneurialism solving for these gals? Tell me a little bit more about that.
I think entrepreneurship is an avenue for women who know they have certain gifts and talents, but they don't fit into the traditional four walls of the church. And a lot of women are struggling with, if I'm not on stage, then what is my purpose? And we're not all meant to be on the stage.
Yeah.
We're not all meant to be on the church staff. We have incredible talents and gifts that help us be the hands and feet in the community. And so even in that, separating out from those outreach efforts that the church does, getting women to see that maybe what you've been through is even a higher calling than that. It doesn't mean you can't do all of those things, but let's separate out what it is that God is calling you to. And so for the women that I have worked with, is getting them really clear on what their God-given calling is. Why do they have the talents that they have? What are the things in their life that they've been through that is ultimately the thing that God wants them to turn around and use to help someone else? And so we're really big on building in confidence, helping them come up with strategic planning for what they want to do, and understand it's got to be sustainable. So how are we going to grow it? And so these are the areas that women have weakness in. I kind of want to do it, but I'm really not sure how to get from A to B. I'm not sure how it's going to all fall out, and I don't know how I'm going to finance it. Those are the things that are keeping women feeling like it's bigger than what they can do. But the other side note I will say is I do think there are women, and we have lots of denominationals and lots of theological thought. And you and I kind of touched on that when we talked the other day, Jon, that women have felt pushed down in some regards and told that they cannot do certain things inside of the church. And that has made them feel like they can't even do some things outside of the church. It's giving them a perspective on themselves that may or may not be true. And so giving them that confidence that you can be respectful to the place of worship that you worship, but also be in line with what God's calling you to do is okay.
Yeah,
and making them
100%.
feel like they have permission to follow the voice of God, which is ultimately what all of us should be doing.
Yeah, one theme I want to connect a couple dots there, because again, there's so much crossover for our community here, because this is both for pastors and the churches that we lead and serve. I think we do our people a huge disservice when we present ministry to them as something that only happens within the four walls of this building and under the umbrella of our ministry, and as if God has put you and gifted you and uniquely shaped you to fit perfectly inside the nursery of our church. Nothing wrong with watching kids in the nursery of the church, or being a greeter, or the sound team, or the various offerings we hold up for people to get involved and serve. But I promise, Pastor, that God has put your people on this planet for something far bigger than serving inside the four walls of your church building on Sunday morning, and by the way, Pastor, that includes you too. Your impact is so much bigger than what happens inside the institutional four walls of a gathering place. And I'm all about us gathering as God's people, but it's this idea that ministry is in the marketplace. And so that's good news for the people sitting in the pews, as much as it is for the pastors that we primarily are serving, that your calling does not stop at the pulpit, or your calling is not limited to this little role inside of the church. You have a much bigger invitation much of the time that God is putting upon your life, and that will get you probably outside the four walls of that church into some kind of marketplace thing. So for us, it's helping pastors see that business is ministry, that there's just as much, maybe arguably more, ministry impact that can be had out in the marketplace than what you're going to have inside the four walls of the church. And that's not to take anything away from that, It's just, I think we've made too much of that, and to our own detriment and to the detriment of the advancement of the gospel. I really believe that. So I think it's an empowering thing, not just for women, but for God's people all over. Like, you were created for more than just what we've offered much of the time in the traditional church. What say you to that?
Well, I've always likened it to this. I believe if we look in the Bible, there are Peters and there are Pauls. And Peter was called mainly to the local body. He did not stretch too much further outside of the confines of Jerusalem. There were some times there he ventured out a little bit when God called him to certain things, but Paul was made to go out into the world. He was made to go out unto the Gentiles. And I think in our churches, we have to recognize that God has called some of us to be Peters and some of us to be Pauls. And we need to respect both roles. We're both needed to fully function for kingdom purposes. And I think that's when my realization came, is that I self-identified as a Paul and not a Peter. But I can tell you that when I started growing my wings and moving into being the Paul that I knew God had called me to be, the Peters got uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so we have to respect there's two roles. There's two things that are kind of going on dynamically in our churches today. There should always and will be a local church body, and thank God for that, to anchor in and bring in and rescue those who are lost. But let's get mature. Let's go out and let's be the hands and feet of Jesus unto all the earth as we are commanded. And let's root those Pauls on and be their cheerleading squad so that we get more done. The days are getting short and we need to get there faster, and it takes all of us working together.
That's another just great piece of wisdom and advice there, that, and again, another theme that we've been kind of hammering home through EntrePastors, and that is the church needs to be more friendly and supportive to the business community and encouraging. Like this is a good thing to be, as you're saying, to be encouraging the Pauls. The problem with the Peters, because sometimes I identify as a Peter, at least from the standpoint of what I'm getting ready to say, they're the first ones to run their mouth off about something and get into conflict. And the church has a few of those in there. Ask me how I know. And I've been that guy at times. So yeah, when you start spreading your wings and doing something a little different or outside the norm, Peter's going to be the first guy to speak up and say something about it. So anyway, the church needs to be doing exactly what you said, encouraging the ones that truly are called and wired and gifted to have that outward focus, to go beyond what is limited to this small gathering here. So let's get into the story of your conference. Then take us back to that, because I think there's some connection to that, getting you to Africa and turning this into an international thing. And then we'll talk kind of the difference between a for-profit coaching business that you're building, conferencing, coaching business, and then a nonprofit wing of that or arm of that. So tell us more of that story.
Sure. So my first conference was in 2019, March of 2019, here in my area. And I just went out on faith. We're called She Steps Forward, and I literally stepped out on faith. Didn't know if anybody would show up. I had networked just fearlessly for about 2 years before launching that conference, going around in the area and really trying to connect with women and other people of like mindset that would be interested in something like that. And so when the time came, I was very excited that we had 4 or 5 women from the local area that would give of their time to speak. We had 3 to 4 different worship band members, not representing their church, but coming in as worship band members to play for us. We had 15 vendors that were all women-owned businesses come in and were able to vend. We were able to give back locally to 2 or 3 nonprofit women-led businesses in the area by doing some things for them. And then this crazy thing just kind of happened in the midst of planning all of that. I got an email from someone in Kenya, and she was seeking out the conference and wanted to know more about it. And I joke, and we laughed about it for years. Like, I thought I'd won the Kenyan lottery. You know how you always get those letters from overseas. I was
have
like,
some very wealthy dead relatives in Africa. And
yes.
if I just give my bank account number, I'm going to be so rich. So
That's
I didn't know I was
it,
related to royalty over there.
But there was something so sincere about her email that I just felt God say, reach back out to her. And lo and behold, she turned out to be her and her husband were local pastors in Nairobi, Kenya, just a small 250 member congregation. And she was actually a little bit connected here to the States. I didn't find that out till later, but she was willing to come to conference. And so in the very first conference, I laugh, I always say God has such a great sense of humor. Here is this person coming from Kenya. And so she attended and she hung out with me for a few days. And I'm here in Virginia in the Hampton Roads area. So CBN is one of our claim to fames. And we got to go around the area, and I got to take her down to see Pat Robertson before he passed away, and because he is a big deal overseas. And we got to know each other. And she asked me toward the end of that week if I would consider coming to Nairobi, Kenya. And I just thought, I'm not sure how I'm going to explain this one to my husband, but apparently there is a reason you are here and you're asking that. And so long story short, with all the technology that we have these days, thank goodness we planned it out for a year, and we touched ground in February of 2020 to launch our first She Steps Forward conference there right before the world shut down.
Wow.
And she also had been very well networked at that point, and we had 60 ladies representing 5 different countries in Africa show up and had just a beautiful day together.
That's really cool. That's cool. Now, have you been back for multiple conferences since? I mean, I know COVID threw a huge curveball. So has that in-person conferencing started up back there? Or is that the plan to continue that?
So we absolutely have. Actually, we ended up, of course, you can't go to Africa for just 2 days. So we were there for a week. And in that week, not only did we do conference, but Teresa introduced us to some local outreaches she was involved in. And so we are supporting a local children's home there that houses 65 plus children called Nemerlin. We were introduced to Phyllis of the Moses Basket Initiative, who is a female advocate to prevent teenage pregnancy and to rescue girls who are victims of child bride marriage. And we now have a safe house under her. And then we were introduced to the Umajo Disability Center, who for us was such sweetness because they have about 200 or so clients, but a large majority of them were either women with disabilities or women who had children with disabilities. And so we've made a whole missions week out of it. We actually go over every May, and we are welcome anyone to travel with us if they'd like to see what we're up to in Kenya.
That's cool. And I know offline, you and I were talking, I'm just going to put this out as a teaser and just a little baby step forward in all of this. I was telling you that I've been nudged several times now, Les and I have, about taking EntrePastors to Africa. And I'm just like, God, I'm willing, but you have to open the doors and make it abundantly clear, because this is not something I'm going to kick the doors down. And I want to truly be helping and assisting and coming alongside of something that's already there, and not just trying to come in and do our own thing and whatever. So I'll just put that out there, and God can do with that whatever he wills. But if someday me and Les are joining a bunch of you and your lady friends,
I love it.
like, let's go, we'll figure something out. But
that's
really awesome, the way God opens those doors, and the work that he's allowing you to do now in multiple countries and multiple continents. So let's talk. I mean, I kind of have an idea of where this is going to go, but when does somebody set up a nonprofit versus a for-profit? Because again, so many of our audience, naturally their mindset goes to, I'm going to just set up a nonprofit. I'll ask other people for donations to fund it. We're not opposed to that always. There's a time and a place and a purpose. But tell us how your thinking process went on the difference between the two. When do you set up a for-profit business versus a nonprofit?
So my coaching piece, She Steps Forward Coaching, is absolutely an LLC. It will be a for-profit. It's there for me to do my one-to-one coaching. I have, as most people do, a coaching package that expands a year, and I want to work with specific women intensely. And so that piece of it is my LLC, just for me to have some special time with some specific people. The nonprofit piece really came into play when I made the trip to Africa, and there is such a need there that there has to be a village to come around these kind of efforts. And so when you're getting into the part now that you're having to build a slower base, because obviously Kenya economics and laws run a little different than ours, and we have to build up a little bit slower over there. we want to be able to fund the things that we're doing. And the Kenyan people, although there is a subset of their population that will be able to afford for instance, my one-to-one coaching services, and I have, by the way, so your listeners know, established an LLC in Kenya for the purposes of doing one-to-one coaching in the near future. So I'm not ruling out that there are not people there that can pay for those services. But right now we're dealing with some of the poorest, the poor, and we have to be a little more open to giving first and establishing. And so that, on top of what we're doing with the orphanage and the girls' home and the disability center, there's a clear need for humanitarian efforts, and that really falls more into a nonprofit focus. And so we knew that we could raise funds for those efforts more sincerely under the nonprofit piece than if we tried to just pay for it ourselves. There's nobody there that's going to be able to pay us enough, for instance, in equality to American dollars to make that go. So that's when, you have to lean into some donations and things. Yeah. But even in our piece here in the United States, let me be clear on that. Like the conference piece that we're doing now here in the States and in Africa, both are going to fall under our nonprofit. And that's because you can get funding right now for elevating women in the entrepreneurial space, and that's a good thing. And so we're going to be playing into that so we can do bigger and better conferences. That's beyond me. That helps me bring in a team of women who are excited about what we're doing and want to be part of that leadership development team and what we're doing. And it also affords us, if here in the States there are women who can't afford some of the higher level services, we'll be able to give back. Now, one of the things we want to do through all of this that's so very important for 0 to 3 year entrepreneurs is seed money grants. When you start out in entrepreneurship, everybody wants you to prove yourself before they'll give you a loan or give you great credit or even get you financed to get you started. And so our whole purpose in bringing the nonprofit piece in is so that we can bring in corporate and business sponsors, so that we can get people on board to donate in. And we can now, hopefully, as each year progresses now, at our conference, award some worthy ladies some seed grant money to get them a little further along than they would have been without it. And that will come with some coaching as well. And that will also happen in Kenya. And so there's just this whole big vision that God has given me. And you just have to weigh out, I can do one-on-one coaching by myself, but this piece is a little heavier and I'm going to need a village and I'm going to need a lot of funding. So that makes the difference between whether you stay in an LLC or whether you open up a nonprofit piece. Yeah. Plus, that concept works very nicely off of each other. They're going to be like helping each other out for years to come. So I'm really excited to have that.
Yeah, that's
so just
cool.
Structurally then, Elaine, are you planning on any more that you have in any other countries? Will that go under the same organization or will they be separate for each one?
What we're going to do in the nonprofit piece right now, we're going to stay based in Africa for now. We have plenty of territory to take just in Africa alone. Mm-hmm. And so right now we're just solidly getting our footing, at least for another year or so in Nairobi. And then we're hoping to maybe start venturing out to some other countries in Africa.
Yeah.
And who knows where God will take it? I'm open. I'll just say that.
That's great. That's great.
I love it. One thing that I just want to capture here, I believe that entrepreneurism, business, is a means out of poverty. It is a solution to overcoming poverty in the world. And I think for a long time, the church, our posture has been the gospel is the most important thing. And yes and amen. Like the world needs the gospel. And if we don't help others around the world who are in poverty, including right here at home, by the way, including pastors who are living in poverty, if we don't help them find ways to overcome the poverty that they're in, they're constantly going to be stuck in a place of dependence. And so I love that part of what you're doing is helping women find that freedom through entrepreneurship, because I do see it being a long-term solution to the problem of poverty, helping people get out of that place and that cycle. It's a huge issue, and I don't think any one of us is going to solve it on our own, but I think that's a big part of the solution is helping people learn how to create wealth for themselves by being in the marketplace. So I
Well,
applaud
God wants us to be
100%.
generous givers. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Right
God
ahead.
wants us to be generous givers, and we cannot be the generous givers that He's called us to be living out of scarcity. We have to live out of abundance. And He's given us the ability to create wealth so that we can live in that abundance. And that doesn't necessarily mean all about just the dollars, but that means you will not grow your heart in a generosity stance if you don't have the ability to be generous. And so we have to lean into that and know that He's given us this ability to create wealth for a purpose. And it's usually beyond the four walls of the church. And so that's kind of where my heart is and what I see. And when I see people who are lit up that they can do things and they can take care of themselves, as we say to them in Africa, we're not going over there to give them the fish. We're going to teach them to fish.
Yeah.
Their pride and their dignity is risen.
Yeah.
And that makes people generous, and that makes people do more.
I love it. Well, Elaine, this has been great. The time's flying by. If we were to point people to a call to action, what would you like them to do? How can we encourage people to learn more, connect with you? What's the next step for them to take?
Well, they can certainly reach out to me through either shestepsforwardcoaching.com, or they can look at all of our activities through shestepsforwardinternational.org. And just for the ladies that may be within your audience, we welcome you to the She Steps Forward International Women's Conference that we host each year in March here in Hampton Roads, Virginia. If you don't know where that is, that's near the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area, close to the waterfront, but not quite. And we welcome you to come take part in what we're doing and see what we're up to.
Awesome. Well, we're going to be cheering you on from our vantage point over here, and we're grateful to have you on the show and sharing your story. I know it's going to add value to a lot of people. So thank you so much, Elaine.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, hey, thanks for watching this episode of the EntrePastors podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can be notified every time we release a new episode. If you'd like to get connected to other pastors who are learning to think, act, and thrive as prosperous entrepreneurs, then we invite you to check us out on Facebook. Just search for the EntrePastors Connect group, answer a few of our simple questions there, and we'd love to include you in the conversations. And if you're really ready to go to the next level, then we invite you to join our EntrePastors membership community. When you become a monthly subscriber, you will receive access to courses, exclusive community, and coaching that will help you along in your own EntrePastors journey. If there's anything else we can do to serve you, please visit us at entrepastors.com, and we will do our best to serve you there. God bless everybody. See you soon.